Hello, everyone. Welcome to Meet the Author. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Meet the Author is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation. We're a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization, and our organization is devoted to transforming the world, both individually and collectively. We invite you to visit us at our website, ifgt.net. And there you'll find just a whole host of a variety of resources, all sorts of things that we hope you'll find of great interest and feel confident you will. There's also a join button on the main menu bar if you'd like to become part of our community of change makers. And there's also a donate button if you would like to support our work, including programs like this. This program is being recorded, and it will be published in the very near future on IFGT's YouTube channel. So we encourage you and invite you to hit the subscribe button on that channel. And as I'm sure those of you familiar with YouTube have now heard the familiar refrain, please also click that little bell icon next to the subscribe button. When you do that, that will send you notifications whenever we publish new material on our YouTube channel. One of the ways we like to distinguish Meet the Author from other programs that some of our fellow explorers in the realms of consciousness, spirituality, and the like also produce, we give our live audience members the opportunity on Meet the Author to interact directly with our guests. And so for those of you in attendance during this live stream, if you would like to interact with our guests directly, please just type the letter Q in the chat. That will notify us that you have an interest and you would like to actually speak with the guest directly. Otherwise, if you'd prefer to just type your question, and you can do that, and we'll try to read as many as we can. Depending on the number of questions that you all have, either kind of intersperse them in the conversation amongst the questions that Rich and I will be discussing, and otherwise, if there are not many questions, we'll just save some time at the end after we've had some conversation. So just one more thing before I introduce our guest tonight, I just wanted to take a moment and thank IFGT's founder and president, Dr. Marianne Miller, and our board of directors, of which our guest tonight is a member. I'd like to move into introducing tonight's guest. Richard "Rich" Spitzer, as I mentioned, is a member of our board and will be kind of centering our conversation around his new book titled Modern Positivity. Let me read just a very brief bio introduction, and then share a very nice offer Rich has made, and then we'll move into our conversation. So Richard Spitzer has over 50 years of experience in communications and behavioral research, and was executive vice president of one of the world's largest marketing research firms. After retirement, Rich developed a new method for macro trend analytics, actually new methods for macro trend analytics, but faced challenges in achieving his new goals. One goal was to write about new trends and personal and organizational change issues, and he has now published 3 previous books. Based on his work for the books, Richard became interested in applying the new fields of positive psychology and patterns of success in the information-intense world. Rich applied his research expertise to find practical, modern methods for successfully using positivity to achieve personal and business goals. And so prior to just bringing Rich on and welcoming him, as I mentioned, he has made a very kind offer that those of you watching this live stream and those who will look at this once it's available on our YouTube channel, there, as you can see, obviously there is the book, but the book is accompanied by both a workbook and a scorecard. And so Rich has offered that if you simply go to his website after you purchase the book on Amazon, he will, and just let him know through his website contact that you have purchased the book. He'll send you the workbook and scorecard for a total of $18 instead of the normal $30 that he would charge for the 2 of those together. And he's also very kindly offered to share a portion of those proceeds as a donation to IFGT. So wanted to put that out there and thank Rich for that kind offer, and then introduce Rich. Hello.
Hi there, Ken. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight.
It's a delight to have you. And I thought we could maybe kick things off because I know I had to read into the book to understand this term that you've titled modern positivity. So why don't we start things off if you just tell our audience what the basic concept of modern positivity is.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll give you, because I've been doing research for 50 years. I got more interested in this field of success, change, transformation, what eventually turned out to be positivity about 15 years ago. Like you said, after I retired, I had a lot of goals. Some were working well, some were challenges. But the short version is, talking to a psychologist friend of mine, I said, I'm having issues, I'm having trouble. And he suggested a book by Wayne Dyer, Manifest Your Destiny. And that set off a chain reaction of looking at the conventional, how to succeed books, law of attraction, manifestation, endless books out there. And of course, as you know, this goes back thousands of years. The two big, factors are, the power of our thoughts. Thinking is basically the only thing over which we have control. And then as you fine tune it, what is it that you're going to think? And positivity or positive thinking came out of that. So, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Manifestation Formula that has, much of the same concept, but it was more the metaphysical. But by actually following the principles myself and talking with people and some people who read it, there seemed to be a need for a more practical, common sense approach with a broader audience. And there is a field today called positive psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's a whole field of how do you change your thoughts, how to replace negative, irrational thoughts with positive thoughts. And so there's a lot of over-the-counter wisdom, there's professional wisdom. And after looking at this, the programs, the books, a lot of wisdom out there, but there's still something missing for me. That's my background, doing research. Looked at thousands of studies over the years, and you get a sense of, is everything there? Is it logical? Is it complete? Are the conclusions supported? And in all the conventional wisdom, one thing really struck me over and over, because I look for patterns. Because I used to do a lot of forecasting, and to do that, you need look at the patterns, and look for patterns and look for basic principles. And the one I focused on was all the advice going back to Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, to the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Shakespeare, Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer. If you want to achieve your goals, if you want to transform yourself, society, achieve your goals, you should be positive most of the time. You should have a positive outlook. We've seen celebrities time and time again get an award and they're told, someone always told me I could do it. I was just persistent. So this was a common thread that goes back over the centuries. So I focused on positivity. And positivity is not just positive thinking to me. It's all that it needs to have its support. You need motivation, discipline, persistence. A lot of emphasis on that, persistence, resilience, overcoming obstacles. So again, lots of advice. Everybody tells me to be positive, to be more positive. It's in our popular culture. But the thing that was missing was that no one told me how to know if I was being positive the most of the time, what was most of the time. If I'm not positive most of the time, am I doomed to failure? Do I have to get rid of all negativity? So this was the research question I focused. If the conventional historical wisdom is be positive most of the time, exactly what was that? How would I know when I achieved it? Because no one ever wrote a book or had counseling therapy that said, if you're negative most of the time, everything will be okay. It's always the opposite of that. So that was my journey, that, I did a lot of different kinds of research, the traditional, meta research of published literature, reassess people and things I've done before, ran some basically kind of focus group things with people. And I felt pretty comfortable that if I had to find one fundamental principle, I would put it under the umbrella of positivity. But there had to be one more twist. Like I say, as you mentioned, the workbook and the scorecard, it
Right.
can't just be a book that says, be positive most of the time, and here's a number. You need something that engages the user through the workbook, and then it actually gives you a measurement instrument that helps you measure your positive, negative, and uncertain thoughts, and can give you visual feedback on, am I making progress? So, long answer to a short question.
Well, but it sets it up, and I think we'll get into more of this. And if I'm going to take a stab at seeing how well I comprehended what I read, and it's clearly written, so I think it was it's easy to understand. But the essence of having a more successful and potentially, if you want to equate that to a quote unquote happier life, then the general advice that you saw by a lot of those folks that you mentioned in your response just now was that you had to be positive more of the time. But getting beyond that to what the heck does that really mean, and how do you put that into your life? That's what you've brought into this field, and the scorecard and the workbook are the tools that actually help you quantify that. And if we get to this and we have time, then maybe we can walk through a brief example. But if you could just kind of give an overview of how then you take this more kind of qualitative, subjective idea of just being positive or thinking more positive thoughts and bring it more into a measurable realm.
Sure. Okay, well, that's a broad question. I'll try to focus just on the elements. First of all the things I've read. I see Diane's on here. I've read her book about quantum, beliefs. It's one of the fundamentals of, we are what we think. How do we harness our energies? But one of the things that bothered me, I have three principles in a lot of things I've done in the research career. One is, if I want to achieve something, I have to learn how to do it. But in my case, if I'm going to learn how to do it, I have to acquire the skills. And to acquire the skills to achieve an outcome, I always needed to understand and believe something about it. I believe an airplane flies because I've flown in it. And, I know a little bit about aerodynamics because we've all done. But a lot of the conventional wisdom, especially, going back 100 years to the New Thought movement, it was just, it's man's destiny to be successful. So be positive or pray or wish. It was the right sentiment, but inadequate discipline. As you fast forward, what struck me was advice without measurement. Most everything in the world today is described mathematically. It's the foundation of all science. So I was trying to find a principle that could be measured, monitored, and modified and adjusted once you learn what's going on. Now, one of the intermediary things is, okay, what do you do to be more positive? There's a lot of conventional advice. You can meditate, mindfulness, visualization, journaling, vision boards. There's a lot of devices that are good techniques that basically have one purpose. As Willie Nelson said, if you replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts, you'll have positive outcomes. So there's a book called The Gratitude Diaries by an author not too many years ago, and she spent a whole year practicing gratitude. And yes, gratitude was helpful, but she said the main purpose was it changed the content of your thinking. So a lot of devices to change the content of your thinking, but you still don't know how much it's changing your thinking. Are you achieving a balance of positive, negative, and uncertain? And then, of course, as you'll read in the book, there's a target level of, when do you know when you've reached a necessary level? So really the core principle of modern positivity, that there is let's call it scientifically based measurement of what I would consider most of the time.
Right, which and do you want to do spoiler alerts and say what that magic number or formula is, or leave that as a teaser to get people to?
Actually, I'll get into it because everything flows from there.
Yeah.
So everything in the universe is described mathematically. Is the foundation of most everything we do today, from manufacturing to aerospace to, and then there's the ambiguous things like political poles. So as I looked around and I looked at the common threads of what people were saying, what the literature subscribed to, I've talked with a number of psychologists. Matter of fact, I mentioned this to Ken, I happened to meet somebody who's head clinician at a mental health organization here in Chicago. We started talking, and the short version is we've reached an agreement. They're going to be testing my program in their clinical system because they specialize in cognitive and REBT therapy. They have, thousands of people going through, and of course, there's a pretty high failure rate. As we talked about it, it's not uncommon, but you have issues of getting people engaged in the process, getting some kind of feedback that makes common sense to them. There's a lot of elevated language, a lot of lingo, a lot of esoteric measurements, but if you're the patient or the client, whatever we're going to call the recipient, does this make common sense in a way that I can use? And another factor was, especially in professional counseling, you may see a therapist once a week, once 2 weeks. What happens in between? So that was another one of my goals is, can you have a companion system that when you're not talking to a counselor, if that's what you're doing, you have something that helps give you some continuing support and guidance into managing your thoughts. So to your question, the principle, we've all seen the bell-shaped curve. This is the normal distribution, the Gaussian distribution. It goes back, 200 plus years. That, if you had a statistics course or a math course in school, if you take marbles, black and white marbles out of a bowl, or you flip a coin, over a period of time, you'll get a normal distribution. That's just a fact of the way things are arranged in the universe. So I said, aha, I have the same question. If 1,000 people are going after a goal, all things being equal, as economists like to say, how many will be totally successful? How many will be total failures? And where will people achieve, an average level of success? Now, let me just take a little diversion here. In terms of our thoughts and our goals, there's a fair amount of research out there that says on a given day, each one of us has 50, 60, 70, 80,000 thoughts. They've measured this through, brain waves and catalysts and stimuli. So if you have 60,000 thoughts a day, and then they tell you, but 70, 80% of those are the same thoughts you had yesterday. And 70 or 80% are probably negative or uncertain. So we have an overabundance of negativity and uncertainty in our world. And if you want to change the balance, you need a starting point. So, the bell-shaped curve, it applies to so many things. More show and tell. Now, if you can see three of them, there's three bell-shaped curves here. This first one here, someone went out and measured the average time for pizza deliveries, from the slowest to the fastest. It turned out to be a bell-shaped curve. This one is shoe size. That's real. This one is, one of your blood pressure measurements. So in our universe, the way things operate is that when you have a total range of possibilities, there's an average, and things tend to distribute themselves around the average. So I said, taking all these pieces together, let me have a starting point, because no one else has set a starting point. No one said what most of the time was. Now, obviously, most has to be at least 51%, and it can't be 90% because then no one would ever achieve anything. So let me take a principle that's well established and is represented by endless examples of where do most things happen. So to summarize it, there's the bell-shaped curve, and what you can't read here is this is where most things happen, in the middle. Some are really very low level of success. Some are very high level of success. So as the book is subtitled, every day there are success stories. Whatever people have as goals, it could be personal relationships, economic, the goals IFGT, personal and societal transformation. we all have goals. So what is the probability that we will succeed? And what are the tools you need to manifest that success? So in absence of any other guidance or examples, I started, well, let's start with 68%, because that seems to be average. And if I'm having 80% of my thoughts are negative every day, I have a long way to go before they're 68% positive. And then the scorecard is a mechanism that allows you to record your thoughts weekly or biweekly. It calculates your scores and shows you in a chart how you're doing. And frankly, that was one of the things that attracted the mental health organization, because, to me, it was very rewarding. They said, we've never seen anything like this. So they did a lot of research for me. Okay.
Yeah. And I think just to clarify, I believe what the guidance through working with the material and the tools is, you're not asking people to try to remember week to week all of their thoughts and guesstimate how much of all their thoughts were positive, negative, or uncertain, but it's to be organized around goals that you're trying to achieve. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I think I have a line somewhere that memory is not measurement. I can't remember what I thought an hour ago. If you ask me how positive or negative was I 3 days ago about my ability to write a 5th book, I have no idea. But if you engage people, I mean, again, I've talked with the psychologists, and they deal in the micro world, how they deal with individual behavior. My background is at the macro level, mass markets. How do you communicate with large audiences of people? How does information influence their attitudes and behavior? So what mechanisms engage people, communicate, and what do they like to know? How am I doing? Is there a reward? And as somebody said, whether it was Yogi Bear or someone else, you can't tell a score without the scorecard. So that we just build on other people have discovered.
Right. And this is all very interesting. So I want to see if I can guide this conversation to blend it with some things that I think at least many of them in our audience would also, they're here because they resonate with the messages and resources of IFGT, which does touch on all sorts of things related to consciousness, spirituality, and transformations. But that does include things that you had also mentioned, and that was more of the orientation of the original book that this one has now come out of, which is more of the metaphysical aspect. And I think lots in our audience will understand that we have various components of whatever I is. There are aspects of us that are very much living in what we call the day-to-day world of our human existence, but there's also this consciousness, higher self, et cetera. And some would even believe that we all have, a piece of the source in us. And so I think there are ways of relating this. I wanted to get your opinions on this, and then start with maybe reading a quote, because I think it sets up nicely kind of this, yes, it's a continuum, but if you want to actually put something like this into practice, you have to have that grounded day-to-day element of yourself applying these things, and then maybe explore how that interacts with some of these other things. So here's the quote. It's a little long, but I'll get through it. So when I first became interested in how to achieve my goals, to manifest what I wanted, I was attracted to metaphysical concepts, and manifestation seemed the most benign idea. But too much of the semi-spiritual and metaphysical practices relied on mystical, what some people call magical thinking. Magic is attractive, quick, and easy, but it did not meet my common sense criteria. Whatever magic I've observed, it was in the form of people who seemed to achieve significant goals with apparent ease and abundance. Compared to what I was thinking and doing, the success of others seemed magical, but that's the flaw in my thinking. I will use the word manifestation, manifest, to represent the transformation process from a thought, creative idea, setting a goal, to successfully achieving that goal. The singular principle that I believe is the most important in achieving success that will help achieve your goal is understanding and managing the nature of positivity or positive thinking. And so I just wondered your take on, okay, you've studied lots of metaphysics, and yet you're also obviously extremely grounded and might observe left-brained. And so kind of how do you see this continuum, or at least these kind of two aspects of yourself or ourselves fitting together, and how does positivity and your work fit into that?
Oh, you're right. I mean, we are a composite. We call it a left brain or right brain, but the reality is we all have a left brain and a right brain. And, what is it that dominates? What do we allow to dominate us? I mean, that's the whole purpose of, psychological counseling, is to change the dominance of negative and harmful thinking. You can put it in this broader context. Earlier too, is we have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of professional work, but we also have epidemics of depression and suicide and anger and conflict. Knowing what we know now has not been a universal approach to mediating all these problems. So one of the things I did to try and understand this, and one of the chapters in there talks about there's three kinds of, let's say, positivity personalities, which I think ties into it. One of the things I did, all right, so over 50 plus years, I've worked with a lot of people. Some of those people who I was sure I was much smarter than seemed to accomplish a lot more, a lot easier than I did. But I sat down, I reassessed them, from this perspective. What did they do? What did they say? What was their style? And I was kind of surprised myself, is that, Bill, head of the company, he never talked about Wayne Dyer or Tony Robbins, but he had a natural optimism, a confidence that, don't worry, we'll get this done. Now, I don't know what turmoil might be behind the scenes, but I was never one to come out and say, don't worry, Bill, we'll get it done. I would say, here's the problem, here's what we need. I'd be a lot more clinical and mechanical about it. But Bill just had this disposition that he could project, optimism. Now, I knew Bill for 15 years, we worked together. He had other issues in life. So being positive and achieving a goal does not necessarily guarantee that it'll spill over into everything else, but it does happen. And I think there's enough evidence that a naturally optimistic person has a better chance of having that ripple out into their other goals than not. So what I think is important is that there is the duality. We have left and right. We have positives and negatives, certain. And the goal is not to totally transform your positivity or your way of thinking and your self-talk. But if you could do a measurement and find out, okay, Rich has said the goal is 68%. And it turns out I'm 59%. I'm pretty close. How would you treat your ambition then? You realize, just nudge yourself a little bit, a little more persistence, a little more motivation in order to continue on, overcome obstacles. But if you see you're 30%, then you're overwhelmed with negative thoughts and self-talk. So we all have the balance. We all have read in sociology and anthropology that negativity is our ancient survival mechanism, but that was necessary when you would walk into a cave and you didn't know if there was a saber-toothed tiger. Today, we don't have, natural made dark caves. We have, caves we've created ourselves. So we have to learn how to deal with what's out there and learn to either nudge or change our way of thinking, but it's a balance, because too much of what I read sort of implied, get rid of negativity and you can accomplish your goals. No, you can't get rid of it, nor should you, but there's a balance that is your entrance or your threshold to, again, I say, increasing your probability of success. It's not you will succeed, but what I've observed in other people is those who seem to have a more consistent pattern of optimism and positivity were more likely to, show evidence of consistent success, even though I didn't recognize it at the time.
Okay, well, before I continue with my questions, I just see we have one question in the chat so far, and Suzanne has asked if you would give some examples of what you mean by being positive instead of negative.
Well, if you saw the scorecard, there's 7 statements on there. And I wrote the statements, it's like any rating scale. but I tried to put them in common language. I don't have it in front of me, but the first statement is something to the effect, yeah, I have a goal and I know I can achieve it and I'm going to get it done. That's a totally positive. The second statement might be, I wanted to achieve this and I'll figure out a way to do it. Not totally positive, but I'm sure I'll get it done. And it goes down the scale to, well, it would be nice, but if I don't make it, well, that's life. Down to, I never succeeded at anything. I'm just a loser. So positivity is really one of the other things I've known in the clinical is they talk about positive thoughts, but really it's the self-talk you have with yourself. A thought is a fleeting moment, reaction. It's really the self-talk that dominates us. It's a lot of thoughts put together, a lot of negative thoughts, uncertain thoughts. A thought could be, oh, it's a beautiful day. You're walking down by the lake. A negative self-talk could be, it's a beautiful day and that's a great house down by the lake. It must really be nice to living there, but I'm working here part-time. I'm never going to have enough money to live in a house like that. That is negativity. But a thought is, hey, it's a nice day, or it's a nice house. So the positive and negative is really a more extended conversation you have with yourself. It brings up emotions. It brings up those physical, visceral feelings. We all know that negativity, fear, makes your stomach churn. You can sweat. All kinds of things happen to you. This is well documented. So if a thought can make you physically react, a positive, is much more fleeting, and you can feel elated for a moment, but it doesn't seem to last the way negative manifestation does.
And I want to get to another question that one of our audience members would like to ask, but you brought up the subject of self-talk, and I had that as in my notes too, and I thought maybe we'll stay with that, because really I think a lot of what you're describing in the book and kind of continuing with your answer and from Suzanne's question is that we're talking about developing skills that bring a greater conscious awareness to the pattern and constant stream of self-talk that we all have going on pretty much all the time. And instead of it just playing on, and Rich points out in the book that we've got some incredible volume of thoughts daily that have been estimated, and most of those are repeated day after day, and that is this self-talk. But I want to put a little different spin on this question, because for people who find themselves on the spiritual path and may begin to receive what could be called guidance, for lack of a better term at the moment, there can be a lot of confusion, especially early on, as to what is just the self-talk of your regular egoic mind and what might be something that is coming from some other source, your higher self or something beyond. And then also distinguishing that from what could be more clinically problematic, that could be a sign of mental health problems. And I wanted to note for those in the audience tonight and those who will watch later, our next month's guest is a clinical psychologist, and we'll be exploring that as part of the conversation a little bit more. But I was curious, Rich, if you have thoughts about how your work, or just in general from everything that you studied and read, as one is starting out kind of on the path, learning to discern the sources of those thoughts is important, and some might even say critical. And so I'm wondering if it seems like the tools that you've provided and the work you provided might assist with that. But just curious your thoughts on this idea of building our ability to discern the source of that self-talk, as well as your points of trying to actively manage it more, to guide it toward being more positively oriented.
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I talk about, you have to build a positivity habit. You change your way of thinking. again, this is, taking my cues from a lot of the psychological research that, we have a normal way of responding to events. It's the old, nothing is neither good or bad, but thinking makes it so, from Shakespeare.
Right.
It's still true. So if our instant reaction to any event, experience, person, situation stimulates a negative thought, how do you change that? So whatever devices you use to replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts is what we're talking about. So you have to change your way of thinking so that the normal reaction is, oh, well, that's a problem. I'll figure it out, as opposed to, my God, the world is over. So to address the issue of, how do you do this? How do you learn? That's one reason I created the workbook. That, I've read a lot of books. There are other programs out there with workbooks and videos and CDs. So what I did in the workbook is really focus, how do I bring these principles to life with either a rating scale or a question where you have to answer for yourself. It's your self-assessment of, how do you react to these situations? Why do you feel that way? Where do you get it from? There's one section at the end of the workbook where, have you tried something? You plan to try something? What are other people saying? Are they saying negative or support? If they're negative, do you really believe these people? So to try to get people engaged in let's say a low level, over the counter therapeutic assessment of, where do these thoughts come from? How do you react in these situations? But it also, of course, is a disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not there. But if you want something you can do at your own speed, integrate it with a measurement, yes, you have to dig deeper. In fact, my wife asked me this question. Well, what if I do this and I don't do that? And I said, well, and it's not going to work. I mean, this is something you have to do. We spend more time sometimes deciding what to order in a restaurant than we do giving attention to how we're going to change our life.
Absolutely.
Because that's under our control.
Right.
But the workbook is a starting mechanism to begin that engagement. I expect the workbook will be updated, periodically. And that's one of the gotcha questions I got from the clinical psychologist. They read the workbook and they said, you don't have a section in here on disputation. Well, my first problem was I didn't know what disputation was. Well, it turns out you question your assumptions. You challenge your assumptions. Well, if he had said that, I'd have understood it. But right, I didn't get into that. But I read up on it. And, I added some of these, how you challenge your beliefs and where do they come from? And do you trust yourself or do you trust the other person? As the beginning discussion with yourself and maybe others about what you need to change.
Yeah, I think this has the potential for being really kind of fascinating of engaging our rational, sometimes called lower minds. And if you applied this to like a goal of, okay, I want to increase the effectiveness of my meditation practice, and you could apply, merge these two things and using the tools, it's a very different approach than just sitting and
trying to see if you can just really, really get good at monitoring your breath and not getting distracted by your thoughts. It's interesting. I want to make sure that we get to the question that Diane has. So Diane, if you want to unmute yourself and join us.
Good. It's actually Alan's question.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Alan.
Yeah, thank you. Good stuff. I'm curious about how you would reconcile positive and negative in an instance when you get a sports figure. Now, clearly, if you can imagine like a tennis player or a football player, every person on that particular, on that game wants to win. So that is their goal. Their goal is to win. And in a heated moment, the umpire or the referee could call not in their favor. And they would get very angry and get very, very frustrated. And that in my mind, that could be considered negativity. I don't know if you do, and that's really my question, because many sports figures will use that frustration, use that anger to actually motivate themselves, to push themselves to a whole nother level and actually win. So they would be coming off of well, yeah, coming off of what seemingly is a negative thing and actually use it to move themselves into a winning position and to win, to get the goal that they're seeking, whichever sport they're playing. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how you would reconcile positive and negative in that context.
Well, I'll be glib and say, I think you answered your own question, which is that if that's a device that that person uses, because I said positivity is not just a positive thought. It really is what you support: motivation, discipline, persistence. And if, being totally immersed, totally engaged in that activity, and if you have to have that outburst in order to continue that focus and energy, then that's their positivity or coping mechanism to maintain their motivation. I'm going to win. I don't care what it takes.
Well,
Yeah.
so Richard, I don't know that it's actually a tactic or anything like that. I think it's more a reaction. It's something that happens in that moment and they just react. So it's not like any conscious there's no conscious scheming or anything going on. I mean, there may be for some, but I'm just saying that in the ones that are just reacting to a bad call, and then they go on and use it. So, I'm not sure that there's any sort of scheming tactics, mechanisms in play other than an automaticity that's based in a reaction.
No, I think that's it. It gets back to what I said before. That person has a habit of reacting in situations. And if it turns out, expressing myself in the strongest possible terms is what I need to keep fired up, then that's what I do. So I wouldn't see that as a negative. I would see it as a motivational, exercise for that person. Like, I'll show them next time. I mean, it's, I thought you were going to go in another direction where we talk about celebrities, how many celebrities were so accomplished. We see this today, but have in their goals of doing what they want in business or entertainment, but have a terrible view on the rest of their life. Insecurities, people are dying from all kinds of things. So positivity is, I'm looking at it in terms of achieving a goal, not just walking on the sunny side of the street. Oh, that would be nice. But right now, I forgot who said it, let's change the world one person at a time. And we have to start with ourselves.
So I'm actually, and Alan, I'm just thinking as you're asking the question, if the self-talk from that player is, I'll get them next time, or I'll show you. If I were to think to the scorecard for that Rich has provided, and that would be actually a positive goal-oriented thought of, I know I can do better, or I know I can achieve the goal of playing better. And the verbiage may sound angry and negative, but it is a positive thought because it is an assuredness of being able to achieve the goal and being able to succeed.
Yeah, I think the negative response for our poor baseball player was, he called me out. I knew I should have practiced another day. I didn't put enough time in. I guess I'm going down to the minors. And then that then cascades into more negative thoughts, and maybe then it does affect your performance. I mean, I hadn't thought about that particular context, Alan, but yet sports is one of the places where we hear most often from athletes. I knew I could do it. They told me I could do it. My mother, my coach, my teacher, my grandfather said I can do it, and I'm going to do it. So yeah, it's messy. It's messy, but it's, what does it take to persist? The other thing too is in the whole scheme of the universe, which gets back to the prior book, the metaphysics. I don't think the universe does not exercise any moral judgment on our goals. You can have an evil goal or a benign goal or an altruistic goal. Anybody, we can see every day, anybody can succeed. Fortunately, most times it's at least a benign, if not a beneficial goal. But bad people achieve their goals quite often and quite well.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting question. Thanks, Alan.
I'm
Diane,
on-
you had a question. Yeah,
We're on. Could I ask a question?
of course.
About- Okay. I think, well, Rich, you're really, I think you're talking about where the positivity, you're coming from a context of positivity. And then what Alan brought up about the reaction in the moment, that could be anger or something that might be considered negative, that as long as it's in the context of the positivity kind of mindset that you're, not just mind, but mental, emotional
Right. Yeah.
set, that is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, right. I mean, I was not a proficient athlete, but I was on enough teams, and I've had 3 daughters play on teams, and where a daughter would react maybe like what Alan described, struck out, or my granddaughters play soccer and miss something. If they get angry and they come off the field, and coach says, good try, Sydney. But if she comes off the field saying, oh, I'm such a loser, that's a negative. So often the kind of description Alan described is seen as a really motivated, obsessed person who's really into the game. If they came off moping, well, you got a pretty negative attitude. You know, what are you gonna do the next time you're up at bat? So, you know, it's
A losing game. Can you give an example of, like, what are some of the measurements, like the questions that measure the positivity or negativity?
well,
Like
the-
what's the workbook or the
the-
measurement, I guess?
yeah, I mean, the workbook is very simple. It's one set of 7 statements that I started to describe.
Scorecard is.
The scorecard, right?
Yeah.
Scorecard. So ideally, every week, you say, I was thinking, over the past week, I was thinking about my goal of X. Over the past week, how often did I feel this way, or this way? Well, 10% of the time I felt that way, 20% that way, and so on. So I get a hierarchy of how positive, uncertain, or negative I was for the week. And then it calculates a couple of scores for you. It says, oh, you were 70% positive this week in total, but there's an adjustment that says you have positive and negative. Well, we know negative detracts from the positive. So your score is adjusted down. Well, you had some positives, you had some negatives. So you really, your 70% is really 52%. You're below the threshold. So I want to get down to the simplest fundamental measure. And I adapted those scales and those adjustments from risk theory and mathematical psychology. There are a couple of guys, well, maybe everyone knows about Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Think Fast and Slow. And Amos Tversky, who was a psychological or mathematical psychologist. They did a lot of research on risk assessment, how we balance positives and negatives in adjusting risk. You know, so basically, an equal amount of positive and negative have unequal amounts of impact on us. One of the simple examples is, if I won $1,000, I feel good. If I lose $1,000, I'm devastated. So yeah, our physical and emotional reaction to positive, negative is quite different because of how we interpret things. So people could have a mix of positive and negative, but we have to account how negative detracts from the positive. So on that scorecard, I can send you a copy. It's like, you just fill out the 7 statements. What I saw in a lot of the clinical literature, here are 17 pages of, you know, introspective, analytical scoring. You know, did you feel really overly threatened during the past week and you felt the world was closing in around you? I don't know, and I'm not going to tell you. So there are a lot of very elaborate rating systems, which is not how people talk to themselves. I spent 50 years managing thousands of studies, and you got to talk to people in their own language. And you know what? You've got to talk to yourself in your own language. You can't adopt fancy lingo in order to do a self-assessment. So I try to put the statements into, this is what I would say to myself that's simple enough. But it also says, if you want to adjust it a little, say, well, I wouldn't say quite that, go ahead. Because when you do measurement, there's 2 things. There's the absolute measurement, is it high or low? But more important in many of these mechanisms, am I seeing change?
Right.
You know, I learned this many years ago in doing research. When clients said, we know our scores are wrong, but we know how to interpret them, and we watch and see if they change over the years. Is our market share going up? So if you're not changing things, it doesn't matter what the absolute number is.
Thank you very much.
And I think that points out an important thing, that this is something that, like many of these things, as well as practices that many of our audience members may be engaging in for the spiritual aspects of their lives, for instance, it's a matter of practice. It's the same thing if you're trying to become physically conditioned or change your diet to be healthier or whatever. It's not, unfortunately, we're more and more conditioned to think that if you flip a switch or take a pill or something, everything's going to change in an instant. But that's not what these types of things are about. And I think a benefit of the scorecard is it feeds you information through different sensory inputs. So it's not just keeping track in your mind. Your eyes see it, you register it, you get more used to focusing week over week on these things, paying attention to them, getting a little better sense of how you would score them on a percentage basis. And I could see easily over time how you would become more facile with this, and it would begin to yield the patterns that you were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this book is the second book. After I work on this and use it for another year, maybe there'll be a further improvement. Everything I've done, and some people think it's too trite, but, there's one statement by one person who sums up the entire field of positive psychology better than any psychologist, although some had pretty simple statements. Henry Ford had a simple statement. He said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So you may have heard that. What else is there?
Right.
But we must make things elaborate, complex. But that's just our nature.
Yeah.
Everything in the world today, every single thing, I was just rereading something, said, no matter what we're looking at today, everything is undergoing change. And we're all trying to fix things, improve things. So whatever I've done is a step, I hope, in that direction, but it's not the final step.
Right. I want to take the conversation a little bit in a different direction for just a minute or two, because it's something that I've been trying to make a regular part of the Meet the Author programs, to ask our guests for their thoughts on one of the central components of IFGT and its work, which is this concept of moving toward a tipping point or tipping points that are generally spoken about in this context of moving toward a different place for humanity that has evolved or somehow transformed more to a different place in its consciousness. And Rich has participated in some of our conversations before and brings a perspective to this that I think is very helpful. And maybe if you can comment on, the tipping point and what IFGT as an organization and we all as individuals can do to facilitate the advancement of the tipping point, but also how positivity and the work we've been discussing this hour relates to that.
Well, yeah, I've been involved with IFGT, I don't know if it's 3 years now. And, it has all the goals that I subscribe to. It's got people who saw this and have led it. But, we've had some of these discussions. It's how do we focus our energies and beliefs and enlist other people to do the same thing? Now, part of it is I have to believe I can contribute. I have to believe the organization can do it. I mean, basically, what we're saying is I have to maintain a persistent, positive belief that our goal is obtainable. And every time there's an obstacle or challenge, how do we deal with it? So it's the persistence and a confident, positive belief that we know it's necessary. I don't have to challenge that, but that, I heard somebody talking the other day and said, if 100 people are out there trying to achieve a goal and 50 of them give up, you've now doubled your chances of success.
Yeah.
And it's really all about persistence.
Yeah.
So I think for IFGT, the goals and the needs are never going to go away. So the positivity quotient here is persistence, and adapting to whatever we discover is necessary to change the minds of others.
So I'm wanting to understand your work better. Is your premise that by tuning into what you're doing, people would become aware of their pattern, whereby if they could see it, they could change it? Is that the idea? But once I've asked you that, then I want to say, well, why are people negative? So by just showing them that they are doesn't deal with what's causal. Why are some people so gloomy? You know, I mean, these are deep things, but I'm asking you, is it helpful to people who are deeply negative to tune into your book and just by observing the mapping and the, you know, the reality of who they are compared to who they should be, blah, 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 that they would actually be able to implement changes and become more positive because they've read your book?
Yes, maybe. I say that is that there's a whole universe out there of people, let's say, who are negative. And the reality is, just like I said, there's a bell-shaped curve, 68%. The reality is some people are never going to look at it because they say, I don't need it, I'm successful. There are people who are totally negative who won't even pick it up. So there is a middle range of people that I hope will find it, use it, and find it useful. They will find a way to work with it. I worked with a group of psychiatrists a few years ago that had the same question about how to increase patient compliance. And it turned out there was the same, 6-group segmentation, that all their efforts became focused on the people in the middle who had the potential to change. Some people were pretty good patients, didn't need a lot of nudging. Some people were lost causes. So to answer your question, Suzanne, this isn't going to be for everybody. It's not going to work for everybody. But if there's 20 or 30% of the population that connects with it and can use it, then I would say that's successful. What do we learn from that? But the reality is it's not going to work for everybody because nothing ever does. And the whole history of psychology is nothing seems to work very long for most people. So, which you mentioned before, all the pills and other things. So it's a program to add something to the current curriculum that's out there. It's self-selecting that I want to learn it, I want to use it, and I can learn from it. But you hit a good point. It's not going to work for everybody, but if it worked for 25%, that would be a pretty huge success in this world.
Oh, that would be huge. But do you find that that's true? Do you find that people doing your work actually, there's a decent percentage of real effect that it's had?
Well, this incarnation is new. The book was published a week ago. So, but in the prior version, small scale groups of people, I think their general reaction was, you've made me think about things differently. I'm more aware of it. And having a scorecard, even though they didn't maintain it, it got them to be more aware that if you want to get a quick fix on your positivity, you can. One thing I put into the scorecard, I say you should do it once a week. And people aren't going to do that. You can do it once every 2 weeks, okay. But like everything else, in talking with people, they said, well, I don't want to wait a week. Well, if you just do it whenever you feel like it, the thing becomes worthless. You're just measuring volatility of emotions. So in the work, I said, here's your weekly scorecard. Here's also your quick fix scorecard. Anytime you want to take a quick check on how you're feeling, are you really up or are you really down? How do I feel today? Like, oh, do I have a temperature today? Do I have COVID? I'm going to take my temperature. So recognizing kind of what you're talking about, if you want a quick fix on what you're thinking, go to this other worksheet and fill it out if it makes you feel better. Because it's all about engagement, getting them to do something often enough that it becomes fun. It's a game. You see a score. Everybody wants to see their score go up. How do you get them to make that habitual?
Well, I'm just thinking it's so, it's one of the most profound situations of who are you? And, if we were Christ-like, which would be totally positive, that'd be good. But we're all, deeply concerned about this. And, it's the work we do to become, the thing that occurred to me, positive is your word. My word would be accepting, but it's not quite the same. But it's a real key to behavior. I think, you know, that you're near. I'll tell you me. I think acceptance is the key to the universe, and very tricky to allow things to be as they are instead of first resisting, which just makes them persist. But that realization that acceptance is the key. You have to accept reality because it is, and yet most people, all of us, live in resistance. You know. So acceptance to me is, it would to me be my word, that'd be your word is positivity. But I think, you know, and that's something to really work with, you know, how do you allow things to be as they are when they're terrible, when you don't like them, when you don't want them?
I think Rich would say, and I'll let him speak for himself, but my sense after having read the book and speaking with him a little is that you are describing what is in the positivity realm, and positivity is not the same as constantly whistling a happy tune and thinking that, you know, you see life through rose-colored glasses. And so if you had the person you were describing initially that, you know, is really glum and negative, and they shift possibly through using the work that Rich is sharing toward acceptance, that is moving into more of a positive way of life.
Yeah, I think in this case, acceptance is a transition to positivity in terms of, if I encounter something bad, is my acceptance one of giving up, that nothing can be achieved? Or do I say, okay, I accept it, now I'm going to figure out how to fix it?
Yeah, you don't lie to yourself. Right.
Right, you know.
Yeah.
I was listening to a broadcast. There was a man back in the 50s, 60s, Earl Nightingale. He was a popular, positive thinking. I read his stuff many years ago. You know, I probably dismissed it. I went back to reread some of it because it came up, and I found that he was pretty straightforward. And he talked about a man by the name of W. Clement Stone. He was an insurance executive here in Chicago. He owned a big insurance company, and he was known as Mr. Positive. No matter what problem came up, he said he accepted it. He said, now what are we going to do about it? As opposed to, oh my God. See, there's a tragedy of negativity. The tragedy of negativity is, number one, it discourages you from continuing. You don't see opportunities. You basically, you give up. I mean, negativity both stops you, it discourages you, and it blinds you to ways to fix the problem. So you've got to deal with all of them. You know, this is the gift we have, the ability to think and wonder about what's going on and trying to figure it out. Because as the subtitle of the book says, every day we see success stories. I mean, you know, I studied a lot about Jeff Bezos and Amazon because, you know, he's a little younger than I am, but we were interested in, because he was in retailing and I did a lot of work there. And he had a singular belief that he was going to make this work. Everybody told him it was stupid, you know, whether you like him or don't like him or Amazon or not, but, you know, he had a belief that no obstacle was going to stop him, and he would adapt his plans to bring something to fruition. So it's accepting reality, yes. And then if it's an obstacle to you, do you want to change your goal, or do you want to find a way to go around it?
We're coming up on the end of the hour, and so I thought maybe we will probably wrap up with kind of a fun question that I jotted down, and I'm relatively positive it's fun. How about that? So
Are you 68% positive it's fun?
I would say so, at least 68% positive. So we'll see. So at the end of the book, you made what I thought was kind of a neat association, where you share at the end of the book that the process that I think probably gets fleshed out in the workbook, and using the scorecard involves 7 steps. And then you notice that there are a number of ways that the number 7 shows up. And it was just kind of interesting to you that you develop a process and it comes up with 7, and 7 shows up in a variety of kind of important spiritual contexts. And just to throw another little fun part at this, this was the 7th question that I wrote when I was coming up with the ideas for tonight. So just kind of curious, what are your thoughts about, anything about 7s that you want to share?
That there is some order to the universe. Pi is a number. There's Planck's constant. Speed of light is fixed. There are a lot of normalized, standard, persistent numbers in our universe. So if 7 keeps coming up, 7 days of the week or whatever else, perhaps there is a reason for it. It's a natural biorhythmic number. I don't know, but yes, there are a lot of persistent numbers, which is why we have numerology, that people attribute things to it. But it's many, we all know, we've heard this many times, we don't know what we don't know, and there's a lot of things we can observe and we don't know, the causes of it. So it's easier to observe than to explain.
Rich, I want to thank you. It's been a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, and it got me thinking about some of the more entrenched challenges that I'm dealing with, and that there may actually be ways to use some of this work to look at those things. I think one could make a fairly easy argument that we're living in some of the most challenging times that humanity has ever faced. And so anything we can put at our disposal to shift our thinking more positively, I think is both very welcome and helpful, but maybe even more necessary now than it has been ever before. So thank you for your contributions, your work, for your participation in IFGT and serving on the board, all of that. I think it's been a pleasure, and want to thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me, and your good questions and patience with my long answers.
Yeah, my pleasure and our pleasure. So thank you all. Join us again as we do come to this program each 4th Wednesday of the month at 8 p.m. Eastern as our live stream. And again, you can find our YouTube channel if you just search YouTube for IFGT or Institute for Global Transformation. I'm sure you can find it and subscribe, click the bell icon, and we'll see you all again in a month.
Who's the psychologist in 4 weeks?
His name is John Silamparis. He's a great guy. I've talked to him. He's a good friend of Mary Ann's, and I had a lovely conversation with him last week, and really looking forward to that interview. He's an outstanding guy. He should be a great conversation as well. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Ted. Rich.
Stay safe.